Well, now that the trial of Tyler Robinson is about to be kicking off, we've seen preliminary hearings. It's about time to go through some of the various theories around Charlie's death. And yes, I am going to focus around some of the claims that have been made by Candace Owens. Now, here's what I'm going to do that I think is a little bit different from what a lot of other people have done on this. I'm going to use the same training that I went through as a Special Forces intelligence sergeant. So I was an 18 Fox with 1st Special Forces Group. In the capacity of an 18 Fox, I served in Iraq in 2008, where I was responsible for doing all sorts of intel analysis for our ODA in order to determine what targets we were going to go out and execute. So, and by execute, I mean go out and conduct a mission, not execute the person. There was various things that we used in order to determine whether or not we thought a source was reliable or information was credible. And to give you an idea what that looks like, it's not some top secret thing that we went through. It was just a fairly logical pattern. Here's what it looks like. This comes from the Admiralty Code. You can also find it right here in Field Manual FM2-22.3, and you can find it in other sources as well. But here's what you see. You see source reliability and you see information credibility. Now, here's the deal with sources. There's a variety of different INTs, right, or intelligence platforms that you can get something from. So, for instance, you have human intelligence. You have SIGINT, signals intelligence. You have ELINT, electronic intelligence. You have GeoINT, geospatial intelligence. IMINT, imagery intelligence. So when you're putting together a targeting packet to go after a terrorist, a bad guy, a cell leader, whoever it is, generally what you're doing is you're looking at all the various sources that you can bring together. Because I was an all-source analyst, what that meant is that I was looking at across intelligence or information that was being given to me from a variety of platforms. Now, if it did come from a human source, humans, right? We look at around here on that source reliability. So is the source reliable? And when we said, and we gave a source an A rating, that meant something like no doubt about the source's authenticity, trustworthiness, or competency, and history of complete reliability. Now, when you say no doubt, again, it's not to say that you think everyone's perfect. It just means that this is someone that you've probably worked with in the past. You've been able to determine that they actually do have things like access and placement to the information that they're giving you insight into, and that they've been authentic, trustworthy, and competent, right? And then again, that history of complete reliability demonstrates that this is someone that whenever they've given you information and you've actually followed up on it, it's paid off, right? Consistently, just about every time that you get you're a reliable source. Then you get usually reliable, right? Minor doubts, history of mostly valid information. Okay, and then you get into things like fairly reliable. You might have doubts about the source, but they've provided valid information in the past. Then you get into the whole not usually reliable, unreliable, and then there's the reliability unknown. That's insufficient information to evaluate reliability, may or may not be reliable. So again, if you just have some rando come in and say, oh my gosh, I saw X, Y, and Z, and as you're trying to ascertain whether or not they have access and placement, you can't verify it, right? Or you're not able to corroborate that information with something else. Maybe it's the first time you've talked to the source. So they get a reliability unknown rating, right? Doesn't mean they're wrong, just means you don't know. Information credibility has a similar system. It goes from 1 to 6, confirmed by independent sources. Now, one thing I want you to understand about this, because the description seems obvious, logical, consistent with other relevant information, confirmed by independent sources. There's a couple things that I think needs to be understood. If somebody comes in, let's say Bob walks in the door and says, oh, this guy's a terrorist and he executed somebody or he had somebody locked up in his basement. Okay, well, I got one person saying this is true. Do I have any other way to validate this? Well, if I have another human source, let's say the next day, let's say this guy Bob comes in and he tells us this, and then we call up one of our sources and we say, hey, and we don't give them specifics, but we ask, hey, do you know anything that's going on in the area? Do you have any information? And this other guy, who is completely unrelated to Bob, says, well, yeah, actually, that one terrorist we were talking about before, turns out I heard some news that he might actually be holding some people in his home. Okay. Now, again, to the extent that I don't know of any connection between these two people, and, one's reliable, maybe one's unknown. Well, now we're talking about, okay, I've got different people all telling me the same thing. Now, let's say I call up another source who I also know doesn't have any connection to this guy. And he says, I ask him, do you have anything for me? He goes, well, yeah, actually in this one area, that one terrorist that we've been talking about, I hear he's holding some guys. Well, now I've got multiple independent sources, people who are not connected to each other in any way that I'm aware of, all confirming the same thing. Right now, if they knew each other, the question I would ask myself is, okay, did they collaborate with one another? Because you would have people that would come in and try to give you juicy information because they wanted to get paid. And so you had to have various means by which you could confirm whether or not they were telling the truth. And one of them was multiple independent sources. Another thing that you would do when it goes with logical and consistent with other relevant information is if they're telling me that Bob the terrorist has people captured in his house, and then they give me an address to Bob the terrorist's house, and I know that's not where Bob the terrorist lives, and I have no other information actually linking him to that particular spot. Okay, well, now I'm starting to question whether or not the person giving me this information is accurate. Maybe what I do is I task other intelligence assets in order to try to confirm this information before I go and I actually act on it. So, maybe you go get a drone up and you try to determine, well, do any of the known vehicles we have associated with Bob the terrorist actually arrive at this particular house? And, maybe we look at other signals intelligence or something else in order to confirm things. The point is that I'm trying to tell you is that whenever we were going to go put people in harm's way, or we were going to go try to identify a particular target and then execute that target, this is the process we went through to try to validate the information to make sure it was good intel and then actionable intel, right? So that's the other thing that's not on here. You can have good intel. The question is it actionable? So if someone tells you that something happened, maybe Bob the terrorist kidnapped somebody. Okay, well, I'm glad I know that Bob the terrorist kidnapped something. Do you know where he is? Do you know what time he's going to be there? Do you know how many people are with him? Does he have 12 fully armed bodyguards? Is he wearing a suicide vest? Like, these were all the additional questions that we would ask, because it's all fine and good that I know that Bob the terrorist kidnapped somebody, but if I don't know where Bob the terrorist is, then how do I action the target? If I don't know where the hostages are, how do I action the target? So the first thing we wanted is good, reliable sources, hopefully multiple independent sources backed up by various forms of intelligence. Then you wanted reliability. So now I know this information is good. And then the final question was, is it actionable? What can I do with this information to improve the situation? So using all of that, I'm going to look at some of the claims that Candace Owens has made, some of the information that she has presented, some of the evidence or receipts, as I hear it often called, that she's presented. And we're just going to run it through this and figure out whether or not we think it's very credible. All with the understanding that I know Candace Owens doesn't have the full weight of the United States government and the intelligence community in order to go, she can't launch drones in order to validate things. So I get that, right? I'm not expecting her to be able to have that. I'm not expecting her to have those kinds of resources, but I still want to look at what she's saying. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop for a minute because I want to thank our friends over at Lear Capital, right? Because the bottom line is, here's a government narrative that you shouldn't trust. And the government narrative has to do with the way the government runs monetary policy. Central banks are actually buying gold at near record pace right now, which should tell you something. Goldman Sachs says demand is running higher than expected through 2026. The big institutions are quietly accumulating precious metals. Why? Well, because of things like persistent inflation, runaway deficits, endless money printing, right? When you take all those things into account, the people that understand monetary policy and spending trends are going for something that has intrinsic value and something that the government can't just print more of in order to decrease that value. So here's what I tell you every single time. You don't got to take my word for it. You don't got to take Lear's word for it. But Lear will give you information on how to go about this process. How do you buy gold? How do you store it? How do you make it a part of your 401k or your retirement? And Lear doesn't charge you anything in order to give you this free information kit. No cost, no obligation, right? So my thing would be just go get the kit, right? I got the kit. Go get the kit. Call 800-707-4575. That's 800-707-4575. Or you can visit nickforlear.com to get your free information kit. Plus, you can see how much bonus gold or silver you might qualify for with a qualified purchase. Go to nickforlear.com, get the free information kit, and then just make up your mind after you get that with what you would like to do next. But I know for me, I don't think the federal government's getting tired of inflationary monetary policy anytime soon. So I think things like precious metals are a good hedge against inflation. Once again, go check them out. Who she's getting it from, and let's just determine whether or not we think it's good intel. All right. So let's go ahead and look at one of the first things here. And this has to do with a lot of the claims over like the Bride of Charlie series, which is very narrative driven. Okay. There's a lot of things that she talks about there and that she theorizes in there. But a couple of the ones I want to take a look at is this idea that the marriage was never real, that Erica was an infiltration or a plant. And what Owens presents as evidence is this is essentially secondhand accounts from what she describes as more people who came forward claiming Erica had modeling related ties in New York. And she references Erica's past and family history, parents' divorce records with minor discrepancies, an ancestor's old arrest for illegal gambling. And then Owens points to Erica's public demeanor and certain statements as feeling scripted. So here's the deal. Secondhand accounts with a modeling agency that they believe is tied to nefarious actors. That's not really evidence, right? Like when you look at that information, you're like, okay, how do you validate this? Do you have documentation that you can show me, right? Are there any sort of admissions? Do you have, photo shoots or whatnot that you can directly tie to this particular modeling agency? And then once you've done that, that doesn't really prove anything except that she worked for a modeling agency. And if that's the case, how is that modeling agency connected to things? And does her working for it, does everybody working for this modeling agency, are they automatically connected to any bad actors that you can potentially connect there? And the bottom line is no. There's no primary documents that she presented, no employment records, no photos, no messages that are showing Erica directly working or interacting with this Epstein-linked entities that have been shown. The modeling connection remains an allegation based on hearsay. The family history details are public record, but they're kind of mundane. There's discrepancies with the divorce. Okay. So a lot of what Candace is doing at this point is she's taking this information and then she seems to be creating a narrative around it. And the problem is okay, you can engage in speculation about information. And in fact, in engaging in logical speculation, all right, trying to connect dots, that's not necessarily bad in and of itself. But again, going back to the question is, okay, are your sources reliable? Well, when you refer to more people who came forward, no idea who those people are. And so really what I'm asked to do is I'm asked to trust Candace's analysis of these secondhand accounts. Okay, I have no access to the witnesses. I'm not saying that Candace has to provide them, but I have no access to these witnesses. And to the extent that they're saying something, you're still not drawing a clear line on how this would have anything to do with Erica's marriage not being real with respect to Charlie. And you're certainly not showing how it would be in any way connected or relevant to his assassination. So you have some information from sources I can't verify, which don't seem to be corroborated with anything else that we could potentially verify, like employment records, photos, or messages. I'm sorry, I would not action this. I would not even, I'm not sure I would give this the time of day if I was looking at intel analysis, if it was launching an investigation. Another claim has to be with this idea that there was this elaborate meeting that took place. And to give you an idea of this one, this has to do with Candace is now being sued for defamation over claims of conspiracy to assassinate Charlie Kirk. So these are some excerpts from the long complaint in Harpole versus Owens. Harpole was the guy managing security for Charlie Kirk. And there was kind of this long, elaborate claim that there had been this meeting in Fort Huachuca. And at this meeting, Brian Harpole, Charlie Kirk's head of security, attended a classified operation confirmation meeting at Fort Huachuca, Arizona on September 9th, the day before the assassination. Allegedly present was Erica Kirk, a U.S. congressman, a potential Secret Service agent, and multiple senior military officials. And the source for it was a man named, or he was introduced as Harry Myers, but his actual name, his legal birth name is Mitchell Harrison Snow. And Owens described him as being 100% honest, right? 100% honest. Here's some of the issue with that. Now, one of the questions is why does he have an alias? And his explanation for the alias was a 20-year government gag order placed on him after he discovered a cartel smuggling network during military service. As far as I'm aware, this has never been confirmed by anyone. Now, there's been some claims that, well, yeah, if he's in witness security or if he's something like that, of course you wouldn't be able to have the government confirm anything like this. Except this really isn't how WITSEC works, right? WITSEC requires a court order, active law enforcement supervision. If you're a member of WITSEC, you generally don't go on to one of the most popular podcasts in the world and start to spill your guts about everything. Now, other researchers went out there and found his legal name change occurred around the time of his marriage, not as part of any formal protective arrangement. So the name change was real, but the reason he gave for it could not be independently verified. Now, the other thing that's interesting here is that apparently he made some claims to Candace Owens when Candace's team was vetting him to come on and talk. Now, he said that he was a retired Army staff sergeant and combat medic, which is a 68 whiskey. And he claims that he entered Special Forces training, which is called the Q course, the Special Forces Qualification Course. I know because I was Special Forces. I was an 18 Bravo and 18 Fox, but was medically discharged before completing it. Okay, so why is that all interesting here? Well, here's the red flag for me. I'm looking at this as a source. So Candace is making these claims about this meeting, or she's suggesting that a meeting took place in Fort Huachuca to plot the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And her source is this Mitch Snow guy. Okay. In written communications to Owens before the interview, in the vetting phase, Snow described his background as Special Forces EOD. Okay. Special Forces is 18 series. You have 18 Alphas, that's your officers, 18 Zulus, that's your team sergeants. Then you have our warrant officers as our executive officers for the team. And then on your ODA, you have your 18 Fox, which is your intel sergeant. And you have 2 18 Bravos, 2 18 Charlies, 2 18 Deltas, and 2 18 Echoes. Medics, weapons, Bravos is weapons, Echo is communications, Delta is medics, and Charlies are your engineers or your demo guys. There is no EOD Special Forces MOS. EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, is a separate MOS. They are completely separate, right? So you cannot be Special Forces EOD. You might be EOD maybe attached to a Special Forces unit, but there's no MOS for Special Forces. So when somebody describes themselves as Special Forces EOD and you were vetting this would instantly send up red flags that somebody is potentially padding the resume, or they're not being very, very honest about what it is. So right off the bat, that's a little skeptical. Like I would be skeptical of someone that are making these claims. And then when it talks about things like, okay, so you're claiming that you saw Harpole there, you're claiming that you saw Erica Kirk there. How are you validating these claims? Well, he said his identification of Harpole rested on mannerisms, the same crick in his neck, face, waxy look on his face, hand gestures, shoulder shrug, gait, approximate height, and haircut. Okay. His identification of Erica Kirk. He says that he saw her eyes across a hotel lobby and a ponytail in a photograph he viewed after the assassination. And then he listed his confidence rating as 95 to 99% sure that this is who he saw. Now, the full list of people that he claimed to have seen at Fort Huachuca included Brian Harpole, Erica Kirk, U.S. Representative Mark Amodi from Nevada District 2, a military relative of a Turning Point USA employee, a potential Secret Service agent, and multiple senior high-ranking military officials, all of it from a lobby and a photograph. Okay. Now, I will say this. Owens even said on air in the same episode, she was broadcasting, that she could not verify what Snow saw. Her exact words, I can confirm where you were, I can do all of that, but I can't confirm what you think you saw. I don't know. So, okay. But she still pushed the episode as if this was explosive information. Not to mention the fact that when you get into independent sources, like how do you independently verify the claims that your sources are making? Now, she actually knew Harpole's travel records before any of it aired. Right. In fact, the lawsuit that you can see this up there in the Reason magazine as they go and talk about it. In that article, right, they go on to claim that Candace Owens actually had confirmation of Harpole's flight arrangements. And what's interesting about that is Candace is claiming that, well, yeah, I've seen those flight documents, but he still could have attended this meeting. He still could have made it. There were plenty of times, or there was plenty of time for him to make it. Okay, do you have any other evidence other than Mitch Snow's word? Do you have any other evidence that these people were all together at Fort Huachuca for a secret meeting to plan the assassination of Charlie Kirk? Because here's one of the things you learn very quickly about conspiracies. They're hard to keep quiet when you've got a bunch of people all in on it together. People generally break, or you can have at least other people verify their presence at a particular place at a particular time. Now, as far as I know to date, there has been no one else that has come forward that have verified that Erica or Harpole or that these senior military officers or this congressman were at Huachuca at this time and place. I don't know of anyone. If you guys do, great. Let me know in the comments. But I don't know of anybody else that can confirm this. Alex Jones was even publicly warning Owens that she was being played here. And now, again, Snow is also a co-defendant in this defamation lawsuit that's taking place. Again, it doesn't mean that he's wrong. It just means that he's also there. What I do find interesting is that when Mitch Snow was also listed as a co-defendant in this case, Owens later on and said that she wasn't that interested in Mitch Snow. So let's just kind of run this through, right? Originally, she said that she considered Mitch Snow to be 100% honest in the testimony that he gave to her, despite the fact that some of the stuff that he submitted in order to be vetted before he came on the show should have sent up red flags, right? She described him as a cornerstone witness. She described the Fort Huachuca meeting as confirmed, right? And then as soon as this guy becomes a federal defendant, it's, oh, I wasn't that interested in him. I'm going to tell you right now, this doesn't sound convincing to me. This is something that I would view with a great deal of skepticism. So again, if we go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the show when I started this, source reliability. Okay, so where does Mitch Snow find himself on this? Is he reliable? Well, to my knowledge, that he's never given information before that can be considered giving him a history of complete reliability, or even a history of being mostly valid information, and provided valid information in the past. Again, we can't confirm his claims about this idea that he's on a 20-year gag order because he uncovered some sort of cartel. He, at the very least, did some resume padding or some slight misrepresentation of his military service by describing himself as Special Forces EOD or describing himself as a Special Forces guy. That doesn't seem to be accurate. So where would I put this? I would probably say unreliable. To some degree, it lacks authenticity because he wasn't completely honest about his military service. I'm not saying he went so far as to be like stolen valor, but again, a little bit of resume padding. When it comes to his trustworthiness, the manners in which he said that he knew those or that he recognized those people seems a little bit difficult. History of invalid information. It's minor, but yeah, there was some invalid information that he actually provided for his own credibility. So right off the bat, I'm not giving this guy a high score. I'm not giving this guy a high score for reliability. What about his information? Okay, well, let's look at one, right? It's logical, consistent with other relevant information confirmed by independent sources. None of that is present here. It is only logical if you're already convinced that Erica and Brian Harpole were desperately trying to kill Charlie Kirk. And again, that's what you're trying to prove. So you can't use that circular reasoning to say, yeah, they did it, and here's how they did it. And, you're still in the phase of proving that they did it or were involved in something here. So is this logical or consistent with other relevant information? Not that I've seen. Is it confirmed by independent sources? Nope. How about probably true? Is it logic and consistent with other relevant information but not confirmed? No, it's not even that. Is it reasonably logical? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything to determine that this is reasonably logical at this point. Is it not logical but possible and no other information on the subject and not confirmed? This is where you would consider doubtfully true. Is it possible? Well, here's the problem. When we look at the realm of possible, we don't think, well, anything's possible. What we say is, with any of the information that we have available, does this seem like it really could have happened? No. So I would say that this is not logical. And from what I can see thus far, it does appear to be contradicted by other relevant information. So if I was going to source this, I would say this is an E for source reliability, unreliable, and 5, improbable. At best, he would get an F, which is reliability unknown, insufficient information to evaluate reliability. And the information would probably get an improbable, because I'm not allowed to go into the information assuming that they actually killed Charlie and colluded with it, right? She's using this to try to confirm that. Otherwise, you're just engaging in bias confirmation. So this gets an E5 rating from me. The best I would give it is an F5. All right, for that particular claim. All right, let's look at another one. This is the, by the way, I wanted to point this out as well because I thought it was relevant with respect to Mitch Snow, because there was some other issues here that were kind of interesting. On X, Snow has been posting doorbell camera screenshots of befuddled marshals waiting at his front door, including one that shows Snow himself driving by as the marshals look for their query. There's some interesting things here. Snow told me he refused to meet any of them out of fear they've been sent to murder him for knowing too much. The guys at his door, Snow says, are the type who are just sent to stalk you, harass you, kill you. Oops, I accidentally shot him, Snow said, imagining the excuse the marshals would use after his execution. Snow 56 has been thrust into the Kirk story because of some bizarre claims he made about Erica Kirk and an Arizona military base in December appearance. Now he's a co-defendant along Owens in a defamation lawsuit. Snow isn't just afraid of process servers. He claims he's faced years of harassment and attempts on his life, including an apparent car bomb, ever since he found out while working for the military that American government is colluding with Mexican drug cartels to build drug tunnels under the border. He accused his own father of being the Zodiac killer. He told me he's been targeted with rumors saying he's Blanco Muerte, a rogue special forces agent dedicated to slaying cartel agents, Sicario style. When a beetle flew into the house where he's been laying low since appearing on Owen's show, he suspected it was some kind of insect-shaped surveillance drone sent by Erica Kirk and stuffed it in a Faraday bag to review later with Owens. And he thinks Erica Kirk and Harville might be out to murder him too. Again, these are some interesting claims that can't seem to be verified. This is why I give him a really bad reliability score as a source. Okay, next one I want to talk about is this right here. Did a bullet analysis clear Charlie Kirk's suspected killer? What does inconclusive result means? So when it came out that the ATF had an inconclusive result with respect to the bullet, there was a lot of speculation that this proved that the weapon didn't come from Robinson's rifle. And then there was also speculation that because the defense team refused to allow re-examination, that confirms a cover-up. Now, one of the things I want to get in here when we get into the whole cover-up and conspiracy thing, if you posit a claim and then evidence comes out which refutes that claim, and your automatic response is, see, it's a cover-up. It's like, okay, it could be, right? It could be. But you need to actually have evidence of the cover-up. Because the question here is there a logical reason why a defense team would not allow a re-examination or want a re-examination? Well, yeah, actually there is. Because inconclusive is a defined technical term in forensic ballistics. Now, again, I was also an 18 Bravo, which is a weapons sergeant. So I had some of the most weapons training that you get in the United States military. Does that make me a ballistics expert? No, it doesn't. There's a lot of guys out there that I see talking about weapon systems and ballistics that they may be experts with respect to firearms, and they may know a lot about what firearms do and what the damage is typically associated with a particular round hitting a particular target. But that also does not make them ballistics experts. And so I just want to point out, 18 Bravo, went to combat, shot a lot of guns. I'm still not a ballistics expert. Okay. But what's important to understand about this is inconclusive is not a synonym for doesn't match. It means the analysis could not positively confirm a match due to insufficient physical markings on the recovered projectile. Okay, so why would you not be able to recover it? Because again, when you're looking at matching a bullet or a casing to a rifle, what you're doing is you're taking the rifle, you're taking the bullet in the casing, and you're looking for consistencies. So every rifle can have some unique signature points, and that can be from the rifling in the barrel, or it can also be from elements within the chamber and the casing. So as the weapon functions, it leaves marks. You can then study those marks to determine whether or not they are consistent with the bullet or the casing. When it came to the bullet, it was declared inconclusive. And a lot of this happens because of the bullet's condition, right? So if the bullet is splintered, if it's fragmented, you might not have enough parts to be able to test it against rifling or other signatures in order to have a conclusive match between the rifle or the barrel and the bullet. Now, why would the defense team not want to re-examine this, right? Well, because it's standard legal strategy. Defense attorneys routinely decline additional government testing of physical evidence, particularly when an existing report is inconclusive, because additional testing could produce a conclusive match that would strengthen the prosecution's case. So the refusal to do so can be done to protect the defendant, because what they're going to do is they're going to look at the inconclusive results and they're going to use that to try to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. So what I want to say here is inconclusive does not mean that it doesn't match the rifle. It just means there wasn't sufficient evidence on the round itself to be able to connect it to that rifle. The defense team, not wanting to retest it again, is probably more worried that it would come back with a positive match than it would come back with a negative one or an inconclusive match. So the defense team made the legally correct move to try to protect their client. So again, I think this idea too of people like Candace and others saying, see, they won't allow retesting. That's evidence of guilt. Well, no, it isn't. It could be evidence of the defense team not wanting to continue to do this practice because they're more worried about a result coming back and harming their client, and they can work with inconclusive. So that's all I can say here. There's no competing ballistics report. Owens presented the absence of a conclusive government finding as evidence of conspiracy, but there's nothing that actually proves conspiracy. That's not how proof works, right? You can assume that. You can say that you think that could mean a conspiracy, but you don't actually have evidence, and it would be inappropriate to suggest that is evidence. So again, where do I look at this on this whole tab right here? Okay. Does this prove a conspiracy? No. It's interesting, but it doesn't prove a conspiracy. And to suggest that it does is, I would argue, inappropriate. Not to mention the fact that from what I understand, the casing was matched to the gun. It's just the bullet, right? Because it was a bolt action rifle. So, once again, I'm going to look at Candace's claim here and say, I'm sorry, the evidence doesn't prove what you're claiming it proves. Let's go on to the next one. This one is really interesting. This is one where Candace Owens put out in a tweet, and I have it here in a post, on November 22nd, 2025. Urgent. 2 days ago, I was contacted by a high-ranking employee of the French government. After determining this person's position and proximity to the French capital, that's another way of saying access and placement, I have deemed the information they gave me to be credible enough to share publicly in the event that something happens. In short, this person claims that the Macrons have executed upon and paid for my assassination. You heard that correctly. More specifically, that the green light was given to a small team in the National Gendarme Intervention Group as part of their police force. I'm told there is one Israeli that is on this assassination squad, and the plans were formalized. Again, this person provided concrete proof that they are well placed within the French government apparatus. Further to this point, this person claims that Charlie Kirk's assassin trained with the French Foreign Legion, 13th Brigade, with multi-state involvement. Journalist Xavier Poussard's life is also at risk. This is deadly serious. The head of state of France apparently wants us both dead, and he's authorized professional units to carry this out. I ask that every person retweet and share this I do not know who in the American government can be trusted since this source claims our leaders are aware. But I have more specific information, which is definitely verifiable should they care to reach out to me. Okay. So once again, the sole source for this information, for this plot, which suggests that not only do the Macrons want to kill Candace Owens, but that the real assassin who killed Charlie Kirk was trained by the French Foreign Legion. Okay? Let's go ahead and go back to our trusty little thing here that we use to analyze information. So, source reliability. We don't know. I don't know. If you trust Candace Owens, then you trust that Candace Owens used something like this in order to determine access and placement. And on top of access and placement, authenticity, trustworthiness, competency, and having a history of complete reliability. Access and placement tells me that they would be in a position to have the sort of information that they're giving me. But there doesn't appear to be any sort of history of complete reliability. As far as I know, Candace Owens has not worked with this source before. They have not provided her other information, which she can verify to my knowledge. And either way, she's not going to share her source, which, okay, I understand. The problem is that we're going to get into this. We're going to get into this a little bit later with Candace Owens as a source as well. But I have no way to verify any of this. None of us do. What about the information that they're providing? Okay, once again, confirmed by independent sources. No. As far as we know, there's only one source that's providing this information. Right? There's only one source that we know that's providing it. Now, she talks about, I deem the information that he gave me to be credible enough to share. Again, this person provided concrete proof they are well placed within the French government apparatus. Further to this point, this person claims that. So yeah, it looks like all of this is coming from one source. So this one source is saying that Macron wants to kill Candace Owens and has hired a hit squad and a team in the National Gendarme Intervention Group, and that Charlie's assassin was trained by the French Foreign Legion, and that they're also going to go after the journalist Xavier Poussard. Okay, now, does that information, as we look at that information, is illogical, consistent with other relevant information and confirmed by independent sources? No, you've only got one source, and thus far you haven't been able to confirm any of this with anything else, whether it's another person or some sort of information that would add credibility to it. So, for instance, we don't have any record of anybody from the French Foreign Legion or connected to the French Foreign Legion being at the site. Now, it says trained by the French Foreign Legion. Okay. Well, do we have anybody that we know that went through training? No. Did Tyler Robinson go through any training? No, not that we know of. But then that would just feed into Candace's claim that, that's because that's how we know Tyler's not the guy, is because he wasn't trained by the French Foreign Legion. Okay. Well, who is the guy? Well, we don't know. We just know he was trained by the French Foreign Legion. Okay. Well, is there anything separate that we can use to confirm that information? No. Okay. Is it logical that the French Foreign Legion would want to train an assassin to kill Charlie Kirk? No, I don't see any reason why that would be logical or consistent with other relevant information. Okay, well, maybe the French Foreign Legion didn't plot to train Charlie Kirk's assassin. Maybe the Charlie Kirk's assassin was just happened to be trained by the French Foreign Legion. Okay, well, the problem there is then, okay, what's the overall relevance here, or how is the connection being made, right? Because if you're going to say that, well, then great. Can you provide the information on who in the French Foreign Legion? Can you provide information on who the person was that the French Foreign Legion trained? If you're going to say that you have concrete evidence that this person has the access and placement that confirms they would have access to this information, here's another problem. People will say, well, I have rock solid proof that this person is a high level official in the French government. Okay. Does that mean that high level official has unique knowledge or access to information or intelligence that would give him information about the French Foreign Legion? You can be a high ranking official in the French government and have no need to know on stuff that the French Foreign Legion is doing. Now, maybe he does, but since we can't confirm it, we don't know. And the information doesn't seem to be logical, because we can't think of any reason why the French Foreign Legion would want to provide training to an assassin to kill Charlie Kirk. Nor is it consistent with other relevant information that we can use in order to ascertain this. Okay, is it reasonably logical? I don't think so. Does it agree with some relevant information that we have? I guess the only some relevant information that we have is that the Macrons already launched a defamation lawsuit against Candace Owens before Charlie Kirk's assassination over Candace Owens' unsubstantiated claim that Brigitte Macron is not only a man, but potentially Emmanuel Macron's father. Now, Brigitte Macron has provided evidence to Candace Owens that she is in fact a woman and that she is definitely not Emmanuel Macron's father. Now, do I think that relationship between Brigitte Macron and Emmanuel Macron is weird? Absolutely. Do I think there's been sufficient evidence that has been presented to say that she's a man or that his father? No. So I guess the only relevant information here is, yeah, the Macrons got a bone to pick with Candace Owens. Does that mean they would go through the process of setting up an elaborate assassination attempt through the gendarme in order to achieve it? I don't think so. If you could provide me some other evidence that would suggest that that's true, that would be great. So, for instance, if this guy that has rock solid information proving all of this, okay, where is it? Now, again, she's going to say, well, I'm not going to do that because it would reveal my source. Okay, fair enough. Have you presented it to anybody else that would be willing to look at it? And the response there is like, well, no, because the American government's in on it. Okay, well, then who do you trust to do this other than saying, I've got all this, trust me, and it's really bad? Okay, well, you can do that, you can claim that, but if I'm looking at it objectively, you have not given me sufficient information to be able to judge the source or to judge the information credibility. So what I'm going to say at this point is your source is an F, reliability unknown. I'm not saying unreliable, I'm not saying not usually reliable, I have no idea who your source is. So I'm saying insufficient information to evaluate reliability may or may not be reliable. That's the best I'm going to give them. As far as the information credibility, I'm listing that as a 5, improbable, not logical, contradicted by other relevant information. The best I would give you is doubtfully true, not logical, but possible. No other information on the subject, not confirmed. And I can't even get at that because, again, you haven't presented anything to me that suggests this is within the realm of possibility. Now, you're going to say, what about the source? The problem is that this really doesn't seem like something that would happen or take place, right? And I can't verify your source, so I can't use that in a way to give me a great deal of confidence in the information they're giving me. So, again, I can't, I just can't justify this. Okay. There's another claim that had to do with Egyptian planes. Okay, so this one, Candace Owens drops fierce claim as federal agent tip links TPUSA to hidden Egyptian plane story in Charlie Kirk's assassination case. All right, so what exactly was this? Well, Candace claimed that an Egyptian military aircraft overlapped with Erica Kirk's travel itinerary 73 times, and then she stated it was impossible to be a coincidence. Then she also says that Egyptians stayed at the La Quinta Inn near Utah Valley University the week of the assassination. Okay. So here's the deal. One of the things you need to understand about Egypt is that it actually is a military partner with the United States. It's actually, I think, at various times, it's been the second largest recipient of U.S. military aid. Egyptian military aircraft regularly operate and transit in U.S. airspace as part of that partnership. So an Egyptian military aircraft in U.S. airspace is not some sort of crazy thing. Now, Erica Kirk, as the wife and then widow of one of the most prominent figures in the conservative movement, has a publicly announced, widely known travel schedule. Right? So her appearance at Turning Point USA events were publicized in advance. Any aircraft operating anywhere near those regions on those dates would statistically overlap with her itinerary. So again, not to mention the fact that there were other questions about the timing of things, because Candace was making certain claims about, oh, this happened and this happened, this happened and this happened. And the problem is that when you actually look at time zones, it's like, well, no, that actually wasn't taking place at the times that you thought it was taking place. So the bottom line is that Egyptian military aircraft flying in the United States is not as bizarre as Candace is claiming. And it looks like some of her times were off anyways. Not to mention the fact that, once again, whenever we look at murder, right, my father was a homicide detective with LAPD, and he'll always tell you it's method, motive, and opportunity. What did they use, right? What was the weapon that they used? What was the opportunity they had? Were they in the same place at the same time to be able to pull it off? And what was the motive? Why would they do it? All right. So far, you're tracking planes. Okay, it's kind of interesting, but can probably logically be explained by other things. But what about the Egyptians that say that the La Quinta Inn? Well, that claim rests on one anonymous, undocumented source. So, okay, we have a source, once again, that Candace says is part of the booking process. All right. Great. Since you're part of the booking process, do you have any sort of physical evidence that you could produce that would validate that you actually could verify your claims? And the answer is no. They didn't provide anything. So there's no documentation to show this. There's no security footage that we could look at. There's nothing. There's no reservation record. Now you might be saying, well, Nick, these are Egyptian agents that came in to kill Charlie Kirk, so they took care of all of that. Why stay at the La Quinta Inn then? Right? Why stay at a place where you're going to have to check in? If you're an international, you're going to have to use your passport. Well, Nick, they didn't use their passport. They're smarter than that. Okay. Was there anything that you can give me other than this one source's claim? No. So what did Owens do? Well, Owens then invited the public to go find the evidence. To date, it doesn't look like they've managed to do that. And no Egyptian national has been named, arrested, charged, or referenced in connection with the assassination in any indictment, law enforcement statement, or hearing testimony. Same thing with members of the French Foreign Legion or anybody connected to the French Foreign Legion. So I do think it would be interesting that a foreign military conducting a covert assassination operation against an American political figure would use traceable military aircraft, stay at a La Quinta Inn, and then leave all of it visible to a podcaster with a laptop and a public tip line. This is, again, when we just, I'm not trying to be flippant, but what do? We go right back to here. Is the source reliable? No idea. At best, we got an F. Insufficient information to evaluate reliability, may or may not be reliable. What about the information credibility? Well, it's certainly not confirmed by independent sources. It doesn't seem to be logical, consistent with other relevant information. It's not confirmed. It doesn't even seem to be reasonably logical, because why do the Egyptians want to assassinate Charlie Kirk? Do they want to assassinate Charlie Kirk because Charlie Kirk is a supporter of Israel? Well, that can't be the reason, right? Because one of the big things that other claims that Candace Owens has made is that Charlie Kirk was about to flip on Israel, and specifically Netanyahu, and that he got threatened by Jewish donors. So why did the Egyptians kill him? Why? What's the motive involved? So you don't have motive. You don't have a method attached to the people that you're potentially implicating. And as far as opportunity, you can claim that there's airline overlapping, and you can claim that somebody stayed in the La Quinta Inn, but you have no proof to actually confirm any of it. So once again, I'm going with this is reliability unknown for your source, and it's improbable information because it doesn't seem logical. And it seems to be contradicted by other relevant information, namely that there's witness testimony and there's written testimony that Tyler Robinson admitted to killing Charlie Kirk. Now, again, you can say you don't believe that. You think he's a patsy. You think he lied. Okay. You don't have evidence of that, just like you don't have evidence that the Egyptians did it, or the French Foreign Legion did it, or somebody trained by the French Foreign Legion did it. So, again, don't know what to tell you at this point. Here's another one that is interesting, and this has to do with 12 Israeli phones on UVU's campus. All right, so here we go.
That I can now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, confirm, putting my name on this. Not only can I confirm this, but I can publicly challenge the very Zionist occupied Trump administration, who is aware of this, to deny it, to come out and say, no, that's not true. There were, for whatever reason, 12 Israeli cell phones on the ground at Utah Valley University the day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated.
Okay. Interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's assume this is totally true. 12 Israeli cell phone accounts were active on the Utah Valley University's campus on September 10th, 2025. And then the implication is that this is now connected to some sort of Israeli operation, Mossad operation, whatever it might be, with respect to Charlie's assassination. Okay. Utah Valley University has 48,000 students since the fall of 2025, right? Enrolled over 48,000 students. It is the largest university by enrollment in the state of Utah with an active international recruitment. The Kirk event drew approximately 3,000 additional attendees from across the country. So 12 Israeli registered devices out of 48,000 students and thousands of event attendees is less than 1/10 of 1% of the people present on campus. Now, that in and of itself doesn't mean anything. But here's the thing that does mean something. On any given day at a university of this size, devices registered to carriers from Israel, Egypt, France, China, India, South Korea, and dozens of other countries are active simultaneously. That's what happens when you have international enrollment. A cell tower ping captures any phone whose carrier routes through an Israeli telecommunications infrastructure. So that can be Israeli students, it can be visiting faculty, it can be journalists, it can be Turning Point USA staff who had traveled internationally. Tourists, an Israeli registered SIM card does not indicate Israeli government affiliation, let alone Mossad operational presence. And can I just point something out here? If you're going to claim, 1 minute, that it's a French Foreign Legion trained assassin, but then we have no evidence to determine that, then it's Egyptians. Okay, but we have no evidence to confirm those claims, other than like this overlap of Egyptian military aircraft and Erica Kirk's travel and the travel of many other people. So your claim is that Brian Harpole and Erica Kirk and senior U.S. military advisors colluded on Fort Huachuca to assassinate Charlie Kirk. But then again, we only have one source who is unreliable, in my opinion. Reliability unknown at best, with information that doesn't seem to make sense and can contradict other relative information. So now we're at the Israelis. The Israelis did it. And your evidence for the Israelis doing it is Charlie Kirk being frustrated with Netanyahu or Israel's operations in Gaza. Some Jewish donors being frustrated with Charlie over certain things, people that he was platforming. And a claim, another unsubstantiated claim that Netanyahu was going to take Turning Point USA to the next level, which, by the way, I would just point out that Turning Point was already incredibly well connected with Donald Trump. I'm not sure what Netanyahu was going to do that was take him to the next level that he absolutely needed Netanyahu for. But let's just say, hey, Netanyahu realized a real threat here in Charlie turning on Israel. Again, we don't know that he was going to do that, but that's Candace's claim. And so what they did was they launched Mossad agents to go assassinate Charlie Kirk. And somewhere in the process, those Mossad agents who were going to engage in an operation that could have been declared an act of war with the United States, an operation that at the very least would have, for instance, I'm generally supportive of Israel. I don't always agree with Israel. In fact, I've disagreed with more Israeli governments than I've agreed with. But I'm generally supportive of them, especially in that part of the world. If you could show me evidence that the Israeli government killed Charlie Kirk, yeah, I'd be ready to go to war. So keep in mind that this would have been the single most damaging thing for Israel, American relations. A relationship with Israel really needs to maintain. So they send this kill squad to assassinate Charlie Kirk, and they forget to remove their Israeli SIM cards. That would be a real brilliant move. Now, I'm not saying intelligence agencies can't make mistakes. They can. The Mossad has made mistakes. But I'm having difficulty balancing this incredibly elaborate conspiracy where they do something that is horribly risky for the Israeli government and do something as stupid as show up with a bunch of SIM cards in their phones to go connect this elaborate assassination. So is it more likely that Mossad did that? Or is it more likely that at an event where 50,000 people are in the proximity, roughly, with number of enrolled students and people close by and people attending and everything else, we'll take it down. We'll say tens of thousands. Or is it more likely that out of tens of thousands of people With an international student body, you just have various people who happen to have either SIM cards or phones that would route through Israel. And that if we dug in deeper, we would find similar things with a number of other countries represented within an international student body. I'm sorry. Once again, when we go back and we look at the various things that we use to test for credibility of information, I don't think this meets the threshold. Personally, I just don't think this does it. Okay. Here's another one. This is the last one I'm going to go over because this is most recent with respect to our interview with Sean Ryan.
Charlie's assassination was an occult ritual. And I believe the people around him are into dark, demonic stuff. I think his assassination had to be live streamed. And the people who are evil,
some ritualistic thing, or
so for two ends, the people who orchestrated his assassination, it was ritualistic. I think that they wanted it to be publicized in that way because they thought they were then going to harness our emotion from having seen it to their benefit. And what it did was it certainly did harness emotion, but it was not to their benefit. The emotional reaction that happened, if they could have controlled it and built a conduit for it, would have been amazing.
Okay. Some of this went through. She went on to elaborate that the place where Charlie Kirk has an outline of a pentagram. And so that was ritualistic. There's also been suggestions that, jewelry that Erica Kirk wore had an M and a G, which stands for the G stands for, God or the great architect within Freemasonry. And the M stands for like Mossad or something like that, which again, I think Erica Kirk, or it could just be the initials of her children. So is it more likely that it's the initials of her children, or it's more likely that this is a part of a ritualistic Masonic cult that wants to assassinate Charlie Kirk with the help of the Mossad? But there is something that she says here that I do think is interesting, and that's the idea of the harnessing of the emotion around Charlie's murder for your own nefarious purposes. I could see where somebody might do that. I could see where somebody might harness the emotion of the murder of Charlie Kirk in such a way as to benefit themselves or achieve some sort of objective that was not pure or honest. I could see how that could happen. Here's what I want to just kind of conclude with. I'm not asking anybody to accept the official narrative. All right. If you have questions, I have questions. In fact, let me go over some of them right now that I still have questions on. One of the questions that I have has to do with the 16 minutes of redacted testimony from Twigs. I don't know why they redacted that from public viewing at this stage in the game. Remember, we're in a preliminary hearing. So in the preliminary hearing, there's approximately 16 minutes of testimony from a key witness, that's Twigs, were redacted from the public record. I don't know why. Is that proof of a conspiracy? To me, it is not. It is curious. I don't know why it is there. I'm interested to hear what's in those 16 minutes, but I also understand this is a preliminary hearing, not the actual trial. And so I would like to eventually know what that is, but I'm curious about it. The other thing is there was an abandoned pistol holster. So a pistol holster was recovered near the scene of the assassination, and it's not been definitively attributed to Robinson or to any other individual in any publicly available law enforcement statement, hearing, testimony, etc. So I don't think that pistol holster necessarily proves that somebody else was involved, there was a second shooter or anything else, but it's interesting. Who's it there? How's it been documented? What's the chain of custody? Do we have any, does law enforcement care to enlighten us on who it could have belonged to? By the same token, knowing something about carrying firearms, concealed carrying firearms, and things like that. Is it possible that somebody could have dropped a holster without having any nefarious intent? Sure. But the fact that it was there and the fact that everything that happens, that's an interesting line of investigation. And so I would like to know why it was there or why they think it was there. When it comes to the 30-06 round, understand that, again, I'm a weapons sergeant. So when a 30-06 round generally hits something, usually there's an exit wound. When it hits like flesh, when it hits like the neck, you would think there would be an exit wound. Now, sometimes bullets don't behave the way you anticipate. What causes them to behave that way? Well, if they hit something else first, if they ricochet off of something. Sometimes bullets, when they hit bone, don't do what you want to expect them to do. Sometimes there can be something wrong with the bullet itself. The bottom line is that if you tell me 30-06 wound to the neck, I expect certain things to happen. Some of those things did not happen with respect to Charlie. So I would like to know why. Like, what is the explanation? And from what I understand, they're talking about possible ricochet. They're talking about fragmentation. They're talking about possible problems with respect to the round or the way it was fired. The people that are trying to claim like this was some expert shot, no, it was not. A bolt action rifle that has been properly zeroed, you should be able to hit a target at the range that they were at fairly easily, especially when you're doing it from a prone position. So I don't think it's weird that, you're telling me this kid hit Charlie with this rifle. Yeah, that's totally possible. With very, very little training, you should be able to accomplish that. It's also probable that he was aiming for his head and hit his neck, right? Or he could have been aiming, in the military, we would have said aim center mass. And he could have been off a little bit, and that's why the bullet went where it did. But I agree that it's interesting. Now, a lot of people are coming forward saying, this is proof that this is a cover-up. No, it isn't. It just isn't. And again, stop confusing being a special forces operator or a SEAL or especially with weapons. Stop confusing that with being a ballistics expert. It's perfectly legitimate to say that's unusual, because it is. But what that should cause us to do is say, okay, we'd like to hear the explanation. And the doctor saying, his neck was like made of steel. That's not a good explanation. That's not a good explanation. Okay. By the same token, when we look at things like the weapon itself, Robinson identified the weapon. He noted in his own text that it likely had no serial number, would not trace to him, and he was right. The rifle predates the Gun Control Act of 1968, which mandated serial number markings. The ATF's unsealed ballistic report confirmed a casing match. The spent cartridge casings recovered at the scene are consistent with the recovered rifle. Okay, DNA on the weapon is consistent with Robinson. And this part of the forensic record at this point is not inconclusive. So the bullet itself, inconclusive, but all those other things came back conclusive. Now, if you want to believe that they screwed up the DNA, that they didn't handle it right, okay, but I'm going to ask for the evidence of why you believe that. And if you just say, well, because it's a conspiracy, what's your evidence of the conspiracy? So, again, but this idea that, hitting soft tissue at that range, again, I would want a greater explanation on that. Now, when it comes to the whole idea of the radicalization of Robinson, there's some people that list this as this is a real unknown at this point. How do you explain how this guy one day just decided to murder someone? Well, I don't think it's just one day. I mean, the guy actually has a trans boyfriend. Now, again, if you don't believe any of that narrative and it's all this elaborate conspiracy, one thing I'm going to tell you is the more and more elaborate a conspiracy gets, the less likely it is to hold up. Somebody cracks, somebody breaks, and it's not like there hasn't been enough people to actually offer an out here. So, again, one of the ways to keep conspiracies conspiracy is to limit the number of people that actually have knowledge of the conspiracy. We're getting to the point right now where so many people have to be in on this. This is like the people that think that the LAPD framed OJ, right? Yeah, that's right. Everyone got together and decided it would be really cool to frame OJ one day. Elaborate conspiracies have a real hard time remaining conspiracies. That's all. Not impossible, but a real hard time. When it comes to this idea that, how do you explain him becoming radicalized? I'm sorry, have you been in America recently? Have you listened to the left talk? Here's a question. Did any of you watch the sort of reaction that otherwise normal people had on the left when Charlie was murdered? The normal reaction would have been like, you know what? I don't like Charlie. I don't like what he had to say, but this is horrible. This is horrific. He was a husband. He was a father. He was trying to have conversations. I may not have liked what he said, but man, this is horrible. No, I was watching leftists, especially like young leftists, giddy, dressing up in Halloween outfits, celebrating Charlie being murdered. Do you really think it would be that difficult to radicalize someone? We already have the polling which shows that the more left-wing you are, the more acceptable you believe political violence is. And that's from self-identified leftists voluntarily answering a poll. I went to the University of Washington, Seattle, and I got challenged to a fight. There was another guy running around crazed, challenging other people in the audience. So I'm sorry, this idea that, how do you possibly explain this guy being radicalized? He attended a college campus, right? He was dating a trans guy that he became convinced was under threat of trans genocide from a Nazi fascist. Yeah, I think you could convince somebody that was not completely mentally stable, and a man dating a trans man is not someone mentally stable, to do something fairly dangerous, fairly horrific, fairly horrible, in the belief that it was morally justified in his own mind. C.S. Lewis said this best, where he said that it's the moral busybodies that can torment you the worst, because they can do so with the approval of their own conscience, especially when they can outsource their moral reasoning to somebody else that they believe that they're defending. So I don't think it's crazy. Again, as I look at intel, I'm saying, hey, Nick, based off of everything that's going on right now in these circumstances and what do you actually see, do you think it's possible that someone like Tyler Robinson could be convinced that killing Charlie Kirk was something that he had to do to protect someone he loved? Yeah. I think that would be a motive. So here's my question, because another claim that Candace Owens has made is she doesn't think Tyler Robinson was even there that day. Well, I will say this. There is some video evidence that is harder to tell. There's others that I think are sufficiently clear to say, yep, that is probably Tyler Robinson. Plus, they have also information that his car was actually on the campus as well. They have two different things where it looks like he's changed clothes. The other thing is you have corresponding DNA evidence. So now we're looking at this going, okay, we have one source, the video surveillance. You have other source, which can confirm that his car being there. You have another source in the form of DNA. You have another source in the form of him writing letter and engaging in conversations with Twigs. Okay, those are multiple independent sources. Now, so where do we put that on the category? Well, do we have what about Twigs? Okay, well, we don't have any, I have insufficient information to evaluate his, well, I wouldn't say insufficient. I would say that because I believe that anybody that's trans, they do have a problem properly interpreting reality. And so I would say that, okay, I'm going to approach it with that level of skepticism. Then I'm going to look at, is there any reason for Lance to, or is there any reason for Twigs to lie to me about this? He could have been intimidated, but do I have evidence of him being intimidated? And so this is the part where I say, okay, I might have some minor doubts. I don't necessarily have a history of valid information. But if the information he's giving me right now does seem to be backed up by other sources. So for instance, if Twigs is saying, yeah, Tyler said he was going to kill him and admitted to killing him. Okay. Well, because I'm not able to really judge this source because I don't have a history with them. Now I have to look at the information they've given me. I have to say, okay, is this logical, consistent with other relevant information and confirmed by independent sources? Well, your video cameras is also a source of information, and that is independent from Twigs. The video just shows what it shows. The information they used to determine his car was there is also an independent source. Is the information consistent with other relevant information? Yes. Is it logical? Yes. If we're looking at this and we have all this evidence and the narrative seems to be that Tyler is admitted to killing Charlie Kirk, well, is it logical that he would be there in person? Is it logical that he might change his clothes? Is it logical that he would have a weapon and that his DNA would be on it? Yeah. Is that consistent with the information the source is giving me? Yes. Is it confirmed by independent sources? Yes. That's fairly credible information. That credible information tells me that the source, even though if I might have doubts and I don't have a history, the information he gives me appears to be valid. So maybe I have minor doubts, but so far that what he's given me has played out by other independent sources. So now I'm looking at stuff where it's like, okay, you're either a C or a B with your reliability. Maybe if I'm being real skeptical, I'll say B, doubts, but you've provided some valid information with respect to what I'm looking for. But the information that you've given me thus far seems to be in the category of either possibly true or confirmed by independent sources, and so heavily credible or reliable. Well, the evidence I've been given so far from the preliminary hearing is a lot better on this score for source reliability and information credibility than what Candace is giving me for any of her theories. Now, can I tell you one thing Candace could have done that would have made me a lot more comfortable with her speculation? Well, one, she could have kept her word where, she said, I'll debate or I'll go on and I'll talk with Turning Point anytime, any place. They said, okay, great. Let's plan something in the next 2 weeks and come to the studio. And then all of a sudden you can't. Okay, well, maybe you were concerned for your safety. I'm getting a little bit skeptical of that claim as if everybody wants to kill Candace, but okay. Well, then what you could have done is you could have looked at things like your Fort Huachuca story. You could have looked at your Fort Huachuca story and you could have said, I brought this guy on and he seemed reliable at first, but now I'm looking at some of his other claims. I'm looking at the fact that I can't really verify a lot of these claims. I'm looking at the fact that nobody has since come forward to validate his claims. And so I want my audience to know that in order to be intellectually rigorous, I don't think we have sufficient information to list this Fort Huachuca meeting as something that has a high degree of probability of taking place. The information just doesn't seem credible at this point, and my source's reliability is in question. She could have done that. I would be like, oh, okay. So she posited a theory, and when new information became available, or when she had more time to validate the information that she received, she then said, yeah, I just don't think this is a good theory at this point. But she didn't. She just moves on to something else. Oh, it's the Egyptians. Okay, well, maybe she thinks the information is really good, but then I'm going to ask the question, is it the Egyptians or someone trained by the French Foreign Legion or the Mossad because of the 12 cell phone things or because of your high-placed source in the French government? Because these now it gets a little weird. You're really telling me that the conspiracy to kill Charlie Kirk included Erica, Mark Harpole, a congressman, members of the Secret Service, senior military officials, the Egyptians, the Israelis, the French Foreign Legion, the Macrons, and now Masons. So these people all work together in order to do this cover-up? Really? Like, at what point do you go back and say, okay, the Egyptian thing, I'm not so sure on right now. I don't think that's as credible. I couldn't have, nobody else came in and corroborated the story from the source that I have. Or, the 12 cell phone things might have been interesting, but, that doesn't really prove Mossad involvement, and it can actually be explained other ways. So until I find out more information, I'm putting that theory on hold as well. How about this one? I don't believe Tyler Robinson was on the campus. Okay, well, there seems to be at least, at this point, fairly good evidence that shows that he was on the campus that day. So what makes you think that's not true? Oh, well, the video was doctored. Okay, do you have evidence of the video being doctored? Do you see where I'm getting at with this? And here's why I think this is important. This is the last thing I'll ask you guys to do. I want you to imagine that it was you. Because there's no doubt at this point that Candace is going after Erica, that Candace is going after Turning Point, and according to Candace, it's because they were either directly implicated or in some way nefarious or untrustworthy and betrayed Charlie. And so she lists herself as kind of Charlie's greatest friend and ally and perhaps his only friend. But I think it's fair for me to say that if I go and I speak at Turning Point events, I do tabling events. I go to areas that have been pretty hostile, like University of Washington, Seattle, where I got threatened. If someone were to kill me at that event, and then somebody claiming to be my friend went online and proceeded to set up and make their podcast primary focus, trying to determine who killed me, and with the evidence presented thus far, implicated my wife, the mother of my children, and the organization I'd spent my entire life building with people that I was incredibly close to. If they implicated those people with this evidence, I'd be furious. I would not consider that person my greatest friend or ally. I would consider them someone that really hated me and went after everything that I had tried to create and the woman I loved and the mother of my children. And you can claim all day long, oh, but Nick, there's something shady about this. I don't like the way Eric behaved. You don't know how you would behave if your husband was murdered. I know Tina, would Tina be devastated if I was murdered? Yes. But would she want everything that we had worked on and built to just be destroyed overnight? No. Would she be determined to continue doing what we do on some level? Yeah. She would be. She would look at that as a way of honoring the work that we had done together. Now, if she was guilty, if someone came forward and said, nope, actually, here's the evidence that we have, and it is concrete and backed up by multiple independent, reliable sources, multiple various types of sources, from human sources to maybe we have photographic evidence, maybe we have video, maybe we have audio recordings of her plotting with people to do it. If you could present all that, I'd say, oh gosh, wow, I have really gotten it wrong. I had trusted my wife and loved her, and she was there to kill me the whole time. But Candace doesn't have any of that. Please tell me you understand that. Candace doesn't have any of that. She has innuendo, wild speculation, and things that she is tying lines to that are not even close to being direct. So at this point, you're going to have to conclude she is either Charlie's greatest and perhaps only friend, or there is something in here that is deeply disturbed. Because I'm willing to bet that anyone watching this, you would be furious if somebody went after your spouse this way with this level of evidence, with these kind of sources. Would you now if it was you, let's say you weren't the one that was murdered, let's say you were the one that was left behind. And now someone that you cared about was murdered, and now you're being implicated. Because keep in mind, she was also asking questions about Victor Marx. She was asking questions about Dr. Frank Turek, a Christian apologist. Did she ever come back later and say, okay, well, the stuff we got on Victor doesn't seem to be very well substantiated? Because it wasn't. Oh, the claims we made about Frank Turek, that doesn't seem to be well substantiated. No, she didn't do any of that. She never comes back and says, to my knowledge, from what I've seen, oh, we were wrong on this. No, all these theories get to go out there and exist in tandem with one another, with no sense of going back and revisiting some of this and maybe admitting you were wrong on some of it. But you're in the situation now. You're the one. You're the spouse of the person that was murdered. You are trying to both deal with the grief of this, as you at the same time are trying to make sure that the organization that your husband built, your wife built, whatever it is, continues to carry on and function. And now someone is accusing you with this level of information. Do you feel like you've been dealt with justly? If you're a Christian, does this meet your standard for truth? Does this meet your standard for going after somebody and attempting to destroy them publicly? Would this meet your threshold for evidence, for source reliability? Or would you think that you had been horribly mistreated by somebody that was profiting enormously off of fostering these sorts of accusations and wild speculation? Take yourself out of this for a second. Take it out of it, like your loyalty to Candace, your loyalty to Charlie. Just look at loyalty to the truth for a moment. If you were the one being accused based off of this quality of source material and information, would you think that you were being dealt with justly? I don't think you would. I wouldn't. So I'll sign off with this. If I am ever killed because I'm going out and I'm talking to students, or I'm engaging in the sort of things that I usually do to try to save our culture, to try to save the American family, to try to save our country, to try to save Christendom, if I'm ever killed for that, please do not try to destroy my wife, my children, the stuff that I've tried to build based off of this quality of evidence. If you do that, understand something. You were never my friend. Now, as someone that has done investigations, I can tell you this. If you really wanted to do this and you wanted to do it well, to the point where you could actually bring convictions, that you could actually bring sufficient evidence, you would not do it this way. This is not the way that you would conduct an elaborate investigation in order to get to the truth. Why? Well, because every time you run out a new theory online, what you're essentially doing is telling anybody that could be implicated in this is how to cover your tracks. Oh, I got a source and they told me this, this, and this. Well, the bottom line is that conspiracies don't include multiple countries all doing something at the same time. It usually includes a relatively small group of people. And if you really have a source that has the sort of access and placement that you claim that they have, then what you just did by giving that specific information is you tipped everyone off on who they need to silence or shut down. You've actually given them more information on how they can cover their tracks before you've completed your investigation. Because the bottom line is you want to stay on and you want all that source, you want to gather all that information. And then when you drop everything, you want to drop so much evidence that it would be embarrassing to think any other way. That's what you would do if you were conducting a serious investigation in an attempt to try to get at the truth. What if you just wanted to make money? Well, then what you would do is you would come out with new theories all the time. And then you would constantly tell your audience that you were so close and that you need their help and that you're in danger. And that if it wasn't for them and it wasn't for them protecting you and for them believing in you, you don't know if you could go on. If you wanted to establish this kind of manipulative relationship with an audience that led them to believe that they were investigating one of the most horrific crimes that we've had recently directed toward a public figure like this and make money off the process, then yeah, this might be the way you would go about it. It's just not the way you would go about it if you really wanted to arrive at the truth. So there's my assessment for what it's worth. Take it or leave it. Again, I'm not asking anyone to believe all of the official narrative. What I am saying is that we better have a standard for truth that we can actually measure against reality. And it's one thing to say, I don't trust what the government's telling me. Fine. But that doesn't mean that everything that somebody else is telling you is automatically true as a result. I not only have standards for reviewing information and intelligence based off of my military training, based off of actually doing intelligence analysis, and then having to go and execute operations based off of the analysis I did that could have gotten me and other people killed. I also have a biblical standard for truth and the way you're supposed to go about things like this. And from the two standards that I generally use, I don't see Candace using either of them for the multiple theories that she's put out that we've discussed today. To me, it just looks like wild speculation in a very, very poorly run true crime podcast. I say poorly run because if your idea is getting at the truth, it's poorly run. If it's just to make money and to get clicks, it's actually quite effective. There it is. Once again, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found it objective on some sense. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that I don't have my own biases that I deal with, but I at least try to use objective measures when assessing my own bias to make sure that I'm correct. Because ultimately, I want the truth because that's what I'm accountable for. That is what my creator will hold me to account for. And I want to get it right. And whoever is responsible for Charlie's death, his murder, I think the preponderance of evidence right now suggests it's Tyler Robinson. But if something comes out which suggests something else, and there is convincing evidence that we should be looking elsewhere, then I want that run to ground. Because I certainly don't want an innocent person arrested, tried, and convicted for something they didn't do. But by the same token, I'm not going to allow wild speculation to direct my thinking on this. And I don't think anybody else should either, because there's too much at stake from a number of positions. Once again, thank you for joining us. I'll see you next episode.